is a lot of utter nonsense about Schumann resonances. That there's 8 of them. The frequency of the first Schumann resonance is
Dr. Rollin McCraty.
Rollin is the director of research at the HeartMath Institute.
He is a scientist, psychologist.
I'm really curious where the conversation's going to lead. How are those electromagnetic frequencies affecting us? Are they affecting us?
So there are literally hundreds of studies showing that during disturbances, that there are increased hospital admissions for heart-related disorders, strokes, depression, suicide rates go up.
The heart has its own brain. What does that mean?
Kind of the central theme in almost all the world's religions. And we have this in our language, right? Put your heart into it. Play with your heart. Ask your heart. Right? We don't say, I love you with all my brain, do we? When we fall in love with someone, right? Well, there's a reason for that. Our research suggests that that's not just a metaphor. Nobody's asked me that question quite like that before.
Welcome back, everyone, to Diary of an Empath. My next guest is Dr. Rollin McCraty. He's a leading figure in the field of heart-brain communication, emotions, and their profound impact on our lives. He's the executive vice president and director of the research at the HeartMath Institute, a pioneering research organization that explores fascinating connections between our hearts, our brains, and our emotions. With over 3 decades of dedicated research, he's made groundbreaking discoveries regarding heart-brain coherence, the role of heart in our emotional experiences, and how it connects with the Earth's electromagnetic field known as the Schumann resonances, which we're going to talk about, and how it influences our well-being. His work has not only reshaped our understanding of the human experience, but has also provided practical tools and techniques to enhance our resilience, emotional health, and overall quality of life. Dr. McCraty, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you. It's great to be here.
So I got to tell you how I found you. I have been on this kick of like self-help and spirituality and understanding energy for a long time. And I'm sure you've heard of this, I kept hearing of these things on TikTok called, I hope I'm pronouncing this right, the Schumann resonances. And everybody was saying how there's all these spikes and all of these collective consciousness and rising of vibrations happening. And so I ended up coming across one of your videos and I found it so intriguing. So before we get into that, because I really want to get some insight on what these are, but I want to understand you and your background. What do I need to understand about your mission and what you do and why it's important to you to understand who I'm talking to?
Okay. Nobody's asked me that question quite like that before. Well, our mission ultimately is to help or facilitate the shift in planetary consciousness from its current state of discord to basically a higher vibrational state, and to really help awaken the heart of humanity.
I love that. And how did you end up getting into this field with the HeartMath Institute? I'm just curious of your background because it's a very unique field to be in. I mean, you could have done anything. You could have been a therapist, a counselor. Why this?
Yeah, that's kind of a long story, but I'll try and make it really short so that most of our time is spent on the other questions. But my original career was communication engineering. I used to work for Motorola. So know a fair amount about how to use electromagnetic fields and all that to carry information around the planet. It's kind of what I did professionally for a long time. But even before that, I always had a curiosity, because I just came into the planet with it, about how things work, and would always ask or was curious about, well, what really is a magnetic field or an electric field? These types of questions. And it would ask professors and so on that, when I was in college and stuff. And the answer was usually, well, here's the formula that describes their behavior. I said, no. I want to know what it is, not how it behaves. I know that, and I got that. Don't ask that. It was kind of the tone of the answer, kind of frustrated some of the folks I would ask because I kept pushing on it. Anyway, that led me to that curiosity to explore different perspectives on it. And I ran across a book in a bookstore once and which had some different perspectives on this, kind of some deeper, I would say deeper insights, which led me eventually, long story short, to move to California and get a degree in consciousness studies. This is in the late 1970s, so I can tell I'm getting to be an older fart here. Through that organization and people I met there, helped actually started and ran a company. What wasn't my company, but was the manager of it, that introduced spirulina to the world, and which is then the motive of that was really helping to feed the world's hungry populations and all that. So I kind of got the humanitarian thing going. And long story short, we were actually pulled that off, built a big, this demonstration plant in the Southern California in the deserts to show that you could really do it. It didn't go anywhere. And I realized then, in hindsight, that's what I would say my idealism bubble got popped because we had the technology, and this way ahead of our time, big solar powered spray dryers and fields in the desert, because it was really blocked at political levels. And that's when it really hit me at a much from a conceptual to a really felt understanding that it really is a problem in consciousness. That, we'd say that, it's about consciousness, but when you go through something like that, then you know that, no, it really is. So the heck with this humanitarian stuff, I'm going to go make money again, and started a company in my original field, and in this case, a little different, but based in that, electrostatics, and became very successful, and plenty of sports cars in the driveway and all that. And, but there was a deeper yearning still in my heart, I guess. And that's when I met Doc Childry, who's the founder of HeartMath, through some friends, and spent some time with him. And what his work had been on the different perspective on the heart, not as a metaphor, but actually as the real bridge to our higher self, or larger self, whatever you want to call it, soul, spirit. So I tried some of that and went through my own heart awakening through that process. So I sold that company and joined with Doc and some others and helped him found HeartMath.
Do you find, I'm going to ask you a personal question. Do you find that when you made that leap, because a lot of people, they say like, okay, I want the cars, I want the big house, I want. And when I get those things, I'm going to be happy and I'm going to be fulfilled. But what's interesting is when I talk to people who are really successful in like these big companies or, make a lot of money, I find that a lot of them did not find fulfillment when they got there. Did you feel like you had more fulfillment once you were doing things that made a difference? Once you went to like the HeartMath Center, did you find more fulfillment there?
Yeah, I did, and I still do, and I don't regret any of the choices I make. I have made, and there's a lot of research on happiness. You've probably interviewed people on it, and it's not the things that we chase, especially when we're younger in life, that we think is going to make us happy and fulfilled. Money, relationships, and so on. But at the same time, hey, I had a great time through that era. Don't get me wrong; it was fun having a rapidly expanding, growing business and. Being able to have the resources to do whatever I wanted, more or less, and but it wasn't for me anyway that deeper. What I guess I would say now, I understand my blueprint or my personal mission, this time around on the planet, and so I think being in alignment with that, being more aligned with who we really are and what our real purpose is where the real deeper fulfillment comes from, and the security to know that we can handle whatever comes our way. Is really where that deeper fulfillment comes from.
So let's talk about Schumann resonances. I hope I'm saying this right.
Yeah, you got it wrong.
Okay, perfect. So there's probably a lot of people listening that are like, what? I have no idea, have never heard the term. So let's just start there, because I think that this concept of energy is something that was very foreign to me when I had my spiritual awakening. And I'm a very clinical person because I'm a therapist. So I have that clinical mindset. I always need the evidence behind what I believe in, which is why religion and that was always very difficult for me. But when I got into this energy concept, it almost was like a light bulb went off to me in understanding frequency. So let's just start there with the basics. What is the Schumann resonances and what do they do?
Okay, well, I'll start there, but it's usually where I wouldn't start. But
okay. Well, where would you start?
but let's start. And I'm just kind of curious. Let me ask you a question first, if I may.
Sure.
Why are you so curious about Schumann resonances? What got you intrigued? Why are you asking me about
So I have this fascination with energy, and for me, energy is very real. Well, we know it; it's scientifically proven. We know that it's there. But I feel energy, and I also do readings for people. And I think when I started doing that, I actually started to really get, I guess, clinical proof behind what I was doing was very real, and getting the feedback from people. And it just made me understand that frequencies can affect the way that we behave. I noticed that when I would go outside and I would ground, that it would neutralize, like my heart rhythms, and that I was able to control how my nervous system reacted. And, when I would think about the moon and how the moon affects the tides, all of this stuff to me was very connected. So when I found out about the Schumann resonances, I was like, it makes sense to me.
Okay.
But I also know that a lot of people, I feel like, may not fully understand it and may take their own definitions to it.
All right. Okay. So, Schumann resonances. And I'm going to start with this by saying that there is a lot of utter nonsense that tends to circulate in social media seems about every 2 years about Schumann resonances. And I can say that with confidence because we have one of the projects here at the HeartMath Institute that we launched, I forget how long ago, probably 15 or more years ago, called the Global Coherence Initiative, is really about the study of the interaction between us humans, or humanity, and the energetic environment that we all live in of the earth. And when I'm talking about energetic environment, in this case, I'm talking about the magnetic fields. So I'll get there with Schumann resonances, but I'm going to start with, we all live within magnetic fields of the earth. We all learned probably in grade school or somewhere along the way about, the Earth's magnetic field, the North Pole, the South Pole, what a compass tunes into, right? So that's a magnetic field. In this case, it's a pure magnetic field, kind of like a refrigerator magnet. You stick it on your refrigerator, and that field's a static field. And most people in science class somewhere along the way got to dump iron filings on a glass plate, and you put your magnet under it, and the iron filings dance around and show you the shape of the field, whether it's a horseshoe or bar magnet or whatever. But if you recall, those little iron filings lined up in parallel lines, right? Whatever the shape of the field was. And that simple little experiment is also letting us visualize and see what are called magnetic field lines. They're real things. And what I actually didn't learn then, and actually even as a communications engineer, using magnetic fields to bounce information all around the world, that's what I did professionally, didn't know until later in my career that magnetic field lines can act like guitar strings or any stringed instrument. You can pluck them and they vibrate. So then just like, so the north-south pole, we have very long magnetic field lines, right? Going out into space, many, thousands of miles. And so they're very long. And the length of, just like on a guitar, or I'll just use guitar, but any stringed instrument, the length of the string and the tension of it determines its resonant frequency, or the note that we play. So you change the length when you put your fingers on the fret, and change the length, you change the frequency, how many vibrations, in a given second. So what's plucking so magnetic fields of the earth work the same way. And what's plucking the strings and causing them to vibrate is the solar wind rushing by. Earth is turning. You have the solar wind, 1 million miles per hour on a quiet day. Sun is turning, Earth is turning. So there's this dynamic interaction. So the plucking of the field lines are called field line resonances. Okay, they actually have a name for them, and they've been known. Now, one of the primary resonant frequencies of Earth's field line resonances is, in frequency language, a frequency of 0.1 hertz. So it's below a hertz, so it's more than a second. That's what that means. So it turns out these field line resonances are all of them are within the same frequency range as human and animals do. We all have the same basic physiological rhythms. The same rhythm as when we're in what we call a heart coherent state or a coherent heart rhythm. It's exactly the same, or right in that same range. And these are quite strong magnetically speaking. So this is a mechanism that but I'm going to pause and just say, okay, understand that. So these are quite strong magnetically speaking, these field line resonances. Now, Schumann resonances are a completely different mechanism. But I wanted to start there because New Age and stuff goes all in glamour to Schumann resonances, missing the whole boat about the field line resonances, which are actually quite different and a lot stronger magnetically speaking. So the Schumann resonances are much smaller in magnitude, the amplitude of them, than the field line resonances. Now, these are a completely different mechanism, and these are magnetic waves, again, that are bouncing between the surface of the Earth and the bottom of the ionosphere. Now, for people who aren't familiar with some of these geomagnetic terms and Earth science, the ionosphere you can think of as a soap bubble around the planet. It starts about 50 miles up from the surface of the Earth, and it's a layer of highly ionized gases. It's called plasma, and which is the fourth state of matter in physics, by the way. And plasmas have some pretty special and unique properties, like neon signs, right? That's a plasma inside, right? So one of the properties of the ionosphere is that it's like a mirror to lower frequency magnetic waves. They bounce off of it. So this is how ham or amateur radio operators, I don't know if you're familiar with them, that's how that works. You send your radio signal up, or in basic communications as well. You send your radio signal up, it hits the ionosphere and bounces off. So this is how somebody in the United States is talking to people in England or China, right? You're bouncing your signal off the ionosphere. Or you get a second bounce, and now you're talking to people in South Africa or Australia, things like that, if you're in the United States. So this is pretty well known in communications, right? But when magnetic waves get created it's a cavity, think of it, right, between the Earth and the bottom of the ionosphere. And so the magnetic waves that get created in this cavity, if they fit the geometry, right, of the cavity, the resonance of the cavity, they become amplified and are called standing waves. It just means they're everywhere all the time. If they don't fit the geometry, they quickly dissipate and go away. So these are what are called Schumann resonances. And they're called Schumann resonances after a German mathematician who predicted their existence. So that's why they're just named after him, because he modeled them mathematically and predicted them. And they weren't experimentally measured until late 1959, early 1960. It was the first time they were actually measured, not that long ago, right? In my lifetime, certainly. I was a kid then. And so there's still things to understand about them. But there's 8 of them. The first one, the frequency of the first Schumann resonance is 7.83 hertz. So when they were first measured, it was immediately recognized that that's the same frequency as one of the human brain waves, right? It's kind of there's different brainwave frequencies. A lot of people have heard of alpha and beta and theta, and these are different names for frequency bands of our brain activity, the waves that they're creating. So 7.83 hertz is right in that sweet spot between, it depends on which system you use, but between low alpha and theta, kind of an important human brainwave frequency, especially for relaxation or creativity, things like this. But there's 8 Schumann resonances, and a lot of people that just get into this at a peripheral level don't really understand it, don't know that. They just know there's about the first one. But all 8 Schumann resonances overlap human brainwave frequencies. So this was immediately recognized when they were first measured in 1960, right? And so a lot of experiments have happened. Let me back up now. What I'm just telling you is we live within magnetic fields. Even if you're on the space station, you're still within them. I mean, you'd be past the Schumann resonances. But And they are overlapping. The two fundamental rhythms of Earth overlap our heart rhythms and our brain waves. Heart rhythms are the big ones. Schumann resonances, the small ones, which actually mirrors our physiology. The heart produces by far the biggest magnetic field in our body, which you can measure many feet outside the body with a device called a magnetometer. You can measure brain waves about an inch. Now, whether it means anything, I don't know. It's the same kind of ratio with Earth and us. The frequencies at our heart, big, brainwave, small in comparison. So here's the important thing to understand. The frequency of the Schumann resonances are completely controlled or determined by the dimensions, the geometry of that cavity, the ionosphere Earth cavity. Right? And I can say this with confidence because we have a global network called the Global Coherence Monitoring System of magnetometers that are specifically designed to measure the resonant frequencies in the Earth. So we have these sites, and I wish we didn't have to do this ourselves because they're very expensive and very hard to find the good locations for them. But we have sites, one here in California, on our property, Northern Canada, Lithuania, Saudi Arabia, South Africa, New Zealand. I'm probably forgetting some, but so you get it's a global. The only network in the world that I know of that is a calibrated, time synchronized system that's really measuring globally the magnetic resonances of the Earth. And of course, we're doing that from a research perspective. We're measuring people, right? Long-term studies of people and our heart rhythms and this thing to look at the interconnectivity. The real interconnectivity between the energetic environment we live in and our physiological rhythms. So there's always this stuff that's coming out on social media. The Schumann resonances are increasing, or for the first time ever, we've measured 30 hertz. And I read this stuff and I go, come on. The first time ever, no, you just have a not a very good magnetometer. It's, and you saw a peak in a frequency. It's always been there, been measured since 1960. Schumann resonances are not changing. They're the same as they were when they were first measured. Now they can temporarily be changed, like if the Earth gets hit with a solar flare, for example, and that temporarily changes the density or kind of pushes the ionosphere in on one side of the planet and pulls it out on the other side, these kind of things. That will temporarily change the frequencies because you've changed the geometry, the dimensions of the ionosphere Earth cavity. But then they quickly come right back to their base frequency. And we don't want them to change. This would not be good for us because they are the same. Don't misunderstand me because I'm not saying they're not important. Because what I'm saying is that, or suggesting in our research, is that yes, we are affected by the magnetic rhythms we live in, not just Schumann resonances, the field line resonances, probably even more importantly, and the Schumann resonances. And it is a bidirectional system we live in. We're affected by the fields, but we are also affecting or adding information on the fields. They're carrying our thoughts, our emotions are all radiated and coupled to the fields, is what I'm suggesting.
Okay, so if what you're saying is that these Schumann resonances naturally, they've been doing these same spikes. It's normal. It's not really raising human consciousness, but there's an understanding and an acceptance of a connection between our emotions, our physiology, our bodies, and the Schumann resonances. What's that connection? How are those electromagnetic frequencies affecting us? Are they affecting us?
Did you guys know that I'm not only a therapist, but I'm also a coach and a professional tarot reader? Now, it's not exactly me hovering over a crystal ball telling your future. It's a way to connect with your guides on life issues such as career and love and spirituality. And sometimes people need one-on-one coaching to help them through breakups, toxic relationships, healing the mother wound, their spiritual path, or navigating tools as an empath. So I do all of these things to help my clients pursue life and decisions and understand themselves. So if you are interested in one-on-one coaching or a tarot reading, click the link below to get started. Okay, back to the podcast.
Yeah, well, clearly they affect us. There are hundreds of studies that show that the magnetic environment of the planet that we live in have effects on us. Now, different people have different levels of sensitivity to those kinds of effects. But in general, this just kind of makes intuitive common sense, I think, that the field environment we live in, when it's stable, coherent, in resonance with our physiological rhythms, that's a good thing. When those fields get disturbed, we don't like that. So there are literally hundreds of studies showing that during disturbances, disturbed field times, that there are increased hospital admissions for about everything you can think of, right? But especially heart-related disorders, strokes, some brain type issues as well, but especially increases in things like depression, like suicide rates go up during the disturbance and so on. So it's really our mental and emotional that's affected the most. People don't sleep as well, for example. We get triggered easier. Things that normally would be no big deal. Suddenly we add drama and significance to them, and these types of things during a disturbed time period. So most of the studies historically done have looked at what's called a measure of KP index. It's a measure of magnetic field disturbance, and things like hospital admissions and things. Because it's the only thing they had data from. KP index is disturbance, and it's pretty easy to get, if you're a researcher, to get access to hospital admission records, things like that. Traffic accidents, this kind of stuff. However, what our studies are showing, because we now have something that a global system for measuring the resonant frequencies. KP index is just disturbance of the field. It doesn't tell you what the resonant frequencies are. So we're a very different pictures now emerging. And to make a very long story short, what our studies are finding is that our physiological rhythms are over a longer, slower rhythm, are actually synchronized to the resonant frequencies in the Earth's fields. And more studies are showing how that's a good thing, right? And it starts to make sense when they're disturbed, that we're out of resonance, that we don't do so well, right? Does that make sense? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Sure. Yeah. Well, yes, I do, definitely do, but I need to divorce this from the Schumann resonance and magnetic resonant discussion. They're two different things. And that's one of the things that drives me crazy on the social media stuff, when these people come out saying the Schumann resonances are increasing, that means our consciousness frequency is increasing. No, that's nonsense. So what you're talking about now really has to do, we could call it our growth, our maturity, our ability to be connected to who we really are, that inner security, self-regulate ourselves. So in our certification, our training programs, we talk a lot about raising your vibration in our more current programs, because the world's ready for that language to understand that. So now ultimately we're talking about the vibration of our consciousness, or our awareness, as we become more aware, more conscious, that is associated with an increased vibrational consciousness frequency. Now, the problem here is that we can't really measure that yet, not directly anyway. You can't stick a probe in somebody's brain and measure their vibration of their consciousness or their awareness. You can't put a thought under a microscope, right? Or an emotion or an intuition. So we have to look at physiological correlations to those things when we're right. So, let me take this a different angle on this. So what our research suggests, and mine and many others' experience, is that, and this is not going to be new. I mean, this has been around forever. HeartMath is just adding some simple how-tos to it. But what I'm going to suggest is that we have two hearts: physical heart and we call the energetic heart. Right. Also, it's been called the spiritual heart for millennia. And it's kind of the central theme in almost all the world's religions, right? The heart is the access point to courage or wisdom, these types of things. And we have this in our language, right? Put your heart into it. Play with your heart. Ask your heart, Well, our research suggests that that's not just a metaphor. So that what I'm really saying here is that the energetic heart is a real thing with real structure. It's just in a vibrational dimension. But it's not a metaphor. And it is the bridge to our larger self or our higher self. I like larger self because it takes it out of religion or New Age. And that's that bridge to our undivided wholeness, the energetic system and our physical that we manifest in this dimension of density here on Earth.
It's so fascinating.
Does that make sense?
It does. I know my curiosity is just tenfold right now. And I think what you're saying does make sense because as a researcher, as somebody who comes from a clinical background, you do have to be able to measure things. And I think that we may have an awareness that these things exist, but maybe not have the ability to measure certain outcomes yet. Doesn't mean it's not going to happen in the future. Yeah. So when we're talking about the heart and the importance of the heart and that heart-brain connection, I hear this term that the heart has its own brain. What does that mean? What is that connection that the heart has, and what role does it play?
Well, when you say that the heart has its own brain, it means exactly that. And there's the field that studies this is called neural cardiology. And this we could spend a whole interview talking about this, but the heart does in fact have its own intrinsic, the technical term is the intrinsic cardiac nervous system. So these are neural structures, neural ganglia around the heart. And then within the heart are about 40, 50,000 sensory neurons that send information into the intrinsic nervous system of the heart, or nicknamed the heart brain. And it was the field of neurocardiology, one of the leading neurocardiology researchers, that coined the term heart brain. That wasn't me. Give him credit for that. So the heart actually sends far more information through our nervous system to the brain than the brain sends to the heart. And this is not necessarily new either. That has actually been known. This is basic anatomy since the late 1800s. And that was actually well understood, and it was a very important consideration in the founding of psychology. William James, for example, if you're a psychologist, you know William James. And he way understood this. And it was part of that. And that was the dominant understanding until the late 1920s, early 30s, when it all became about the brain, right? And we forgot about the afferent, or the ascending information from the body. And then that paradigm finally came back into more of a balanced perspective, really starting in the 1970s with a particular research group that was finding that, and so at that time, that in that paradigm, kind of call it sort of an ancient modern paradigm, that the brain, it's all about the brain, the body's just there to carry the head around, right? Nobody believes that anymore, but that was the paradigm for a long time until around in the 70s. And what started that paradigm shifting back to a more holistic or balanced one was discoveries that, so at that time, if it's all about the brain, the nervous system, the autonomic nervous system, they're just wires that the brain's telling the body what to do, right? Well, this particular research group found that the heart in particular was not obeying the messages from the brain. In fact, if you look at the writings of that era, their papers, they're literally using terms like the heart is acting like it has a mind of its own. Well, it does, of sorts. But they didn't know that then. They didn't know about the intrinsic cardiac nervous system and the heart brain, and its neural structure. So we now know this, for example, this neural system in the heart brain, has its long-term memory, short-term memory, neuroplasticity, neurogenesis, all the things to truly say it is a functional brain in the heart, right? I'm not saying that the heart brain is just trying to remember what grandma's face looks like. But the heart has to have a functional type of memory to do what it does, and to regulate itself. But what this research group found in the 70s, they introduced two terms that are important for this discussion to describe the effect that the heart was having on the brain, depending upon the type of signals it was sending from the heart to the brain, that they could measure. They could see that in the effects. And those were called cortical inhibition, right? Inhibiting the cortex, right? Or cortical facilitation. And even in their data back then, although they didn't talk a lot about it, they were finding that the heart somehow knew ahead of time what the next activity the brain needed to be involved in to help facilitate or, guide it to what its next action was. And we followed up on that and went a lot deeper in it. And have actually showed that in terms of intuition or non-local intuition, that the heart gets the signal first, sends a different neural message to the brain, then the brain responds all before the future event happens. So the heart's first, then brain, then body. So we call it the gut feeling, but it's really heart first. I'm kind of rambling here to try and weave a story together for you.
I hear you. That's interesting.
So, the way I got those studies published back in, this was late 90s, was in scientific peer-reviewed publications. And I said that the heart appears to have access to a field of information outside the boundaries of time and space. Okay. So at that time in science, that era, that was perfectly acceptable language, because things like non-locality and entanglement had been experimentally proven, right? It just wasn't supposed to happen at, large scales like atoms and organs. That we now know that's been blown past in quantum physics. They've shown entanglement and non-locality and, large scale macroscopic systems, not just subatomic. So we just showed it physiological before that was happening.
That's so fascinating. It's funny because I'm a very intuitive person. I've always just known certain things either before they happen, or I'm really keen on picking up things, people around me. And whenever I get these intuitive, strong feelings, I always tell my clients too, where do you feel it in your body? And it always is in the center of the chest. I always feel it kind of in the center, or right there, right below the center. It's kind of like that sensation that I get right when I know intuitively that something is right for me or something that's wrong for me. I feel it to my core in my chest, and it is strong. So it's so interesting when you say that our heart has its own brain and literally has its own magnetic field almost. Is that how you would describe it?
Okay. Yes, it does. So that's a different angle on what we're talking about, but let's go there, being you said that.
Okay.
So when we put electrodes across the chest to measure the electrocardiogram, right? Why is it called the electrocardiogram? We're measuring electricity, right? Current flow, literally. Or we put electrodes on the brain, right? You're still measuring current flow. That's what the electrodes see. It's the flow of current. But physics 101, whenever you have a flow of electrical current, you create a magnetic field. Now, electric fields and magnetic fields are different animals. They're different things. We call it electromagnetism because one can make the other, because they are intertwined, fundamentally intertwined. So the electrodes don't see the magnetic field that's generated by that current flow. For that, you need a different device called a magnetometer. I kind of alluded to this earlier in the conversation. So one of the qualities of magnetic fields is they go through things. Now, if you don't believe me, stop using your cell phone indoors.
Okay. Noted.
Right. It used to be that people would say, oh, that's not true, blah, 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 blah. I don't hear that anymore because every major, larger hospital has what are called MCGs, magnetocardiograms, that you never touch the body. You have sensors around it that measures the magnetic field. And I won't go into the medical reasons, but it gives you more precise information about what's going on. So these fields, we are literally radiating every time the heart beats a magnetic pulse, a field. And with magnetometers, sensitive magnetometers, you can measure the heart's field a number of feet from the body. You can measure a brainwave about an inch using the same instrument.
Interesting.
So when we're talking energetics, magnetic/energetics, the heart is by far the big player in our physiology. So I can measure your electrocardiogram on your toe, right into your nose, anywhere in the body. That signal is a synchronizing signal for the whole body. And it's also radiating fields out into the space around us. Now, some of again, going back to the 90s, we were able to show, this is where my communications engineering background really was very handy, right? Mm-hmm. It's using almost the same techniques that I used to use in my communications days to demodulate or decode the information being carried by a field, your voice, your text, whatever, radio station, and so on. we used that to show that the field of the heart was carrying information. Now, it's probably a lot of information that we don't understand yet, but for sure about our emotional state that we've published and shown. So what I'm saying there is that what we feel inside, our emotions, don't stop at the skin. We are literally broadcasting them. In fact, we can stick a probe out here, measure the field, and tell with about 75% accuracy what you're feeling, whatever you're putting on your face, right? Or trying to, right? Now, the next step in that was, okay, well, that's neat. So what? Does that matter? So that was a relatively easy next step to ask the question, does it affect other people? Do our nervous systems also, we know we're radiating them, but do our nervous systems also act like big antennas?
Yes.
That detect those fields?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. That was actually an easy experiment to do.
I love that.
As an empath, you know what I'm talking about. So I define 3 types of intuition, by the way, and one of them is energetic sensitivity, which is the sensitivity to very real, measurable fields from the environment, right? Like fields from other people. In fact, I would say empathy is in that category. Real empathy is our nervous system's ability to detect the frequencies, because they really are vibrational frequencies being carried by the field, the heart's field, and our physiology can detect and decode those signals. And again, some people have way more sensitivity to that kind of information than others. Women in general tend to be more sensitive to these things than men, but not always, not in all cases. So other examples, some people can feel earthquakes coming. I have a couple friends who have that sensitivity, but we now know through our magnetic monitoring systems, we can see changes in the magnetic fields of the earth prior to earthquakes. So in that case, you're feeling those changes, your nervous system's detecting them, and you've learned to pattern match that particular change to earthquake, let's say, right? Or for some people, it might be you're detecting that means somebody's staring at me, right? You turn around there, sure enough, and so on, right? Does this help or does this make sense?
Oh, no. It's very validating, because for me, I love that scientific background, and I've always had and understood the concept that, yes, this is my belief system, but it's very real and measurable. I mean, think about it. Like 200 years ago, the concept of me and you having this conversation right now through a screen would be like witchcraft, like unheard of. And, we understand now that it's very feasible, but it's through energy. Everything is energy. So to me, it makes complete sense that we would have an energetic field. What I found was very interesting when I started learning more and getting deeper into my health and diving deep into my health is understanding my heart, how it affects me, and this thing called HRV. I had no idea what this HRV was until recently. About a couple months ago, I was listening to a podcast and they were talking about HRV levels and why they're important. So of course I hopped on the wagon of let me get a Fitbit and let me measure my HRV. I would love for you to talk a little bit about that. What is HRV and why is it important?
Okay. Yeah. And good question, because that's usually where we would start in these kind of conversations.
Okay.
In depth with human resonances.
Okay. Maybe. Perfect.
So, I think about everybody knows what heart rate is, right? How many times does the heart beat in a minute? Beats per minute, right? But in reality, especially in a healthy person, a well-balanced person, our heart rate changes with each and every heartbeat. So what this means is that if you measure the time between a pair of heartbeats and then the next pair of heartbeats and the next pair of heartbeats, that time between each pair is always changing, right? That's called heart rate variability, beat-to-beat variability. So if you look at it on most heart rate monitors, that gets averaged out. So it looks kind of like a flat line, but that's not the truth of what's actually happening. And so this is what creates our heart rhythm, right? So if the time between each pair of heartbeats was always the same, you would have no heart rhythm. And the heart rhythm's always going up and down and fluctuating and changing, which is actually reflecting the activity in our nervous system. This is a whole hour conversation just to unpack what I'm saying now. And so the intrinsic cardiac nervous system and the heart and the brain and all that is the source of this variability. It's that communication between the heart and brain. is really where it comes from. And there's different mechanisms in the body that are reflected in the different frequencies, literally, in rhythms of the heart rhythm. So there's a rhythm associated with our breathing frequency. There's a rhythm that's created by the heart itself that's in the HRV. There's blood pressure control rhythms that are in the HRV. Anyway, HRV is one of the things that's really kind of simple, where you can spend your entire career trying to understand it. It has that breadth of depth. Now, like what you were talking about with the Fitbits and Apple Watches and so on that have all now included HRV, because of a lot of us actually our original basic research is kind of led. We were the first to actually create a consumer level HRV device, kind of created this industry in a way, well, very real way. But the amount of heart rate variability we have, this natural intrinsic variability, is we have more of it when we're young, and it gets less as we age. So it's actually one of the best physiological measures of aging. And if we're depleting our systems, we're expending more energy than we're recovering, and we do that long enough, weeks, months, long term, that ends up in lowering the amount of heart rate variability we should have for our age. Now, that's really important, because that is a strong and independent risk factor for more serious health problems in the future. So low age-related HRV is correlated to every major disease there is. You can't name one that probably doesn't show a relationship of reduced HRV. So the how much HRV is important, and that's what the Fitbits and Oura Rings and peripheral products now measure. However, there's a much deeper and even more important aspect of HRV than the how much question, because that changes slowly. I mean, it takes over years, right? Months and years, well, actually years, not months. And that is what does the pattern of the rhythm look like? Okay, is it a chaotic looking rhythm, or is it a smooth, rolling hills kind of pattern in the heart's rhythm? Now, because this is now reflecting something much deeper than the how much. It quite literally, Reese, is measuring or reflecting the degree of synchronization or synchronized activity in our higher brain and systems in our nervous system. And this is what we call incoherence and coherence. Coherent rhythms or coherent heart rhythms or incoherent heart rhythms. And this is what all of the Fitbits and stuff don't measure. They're measuring the how much. So the HeartMath devices are really, they don't tell you how much. Well, some do, but most of them are really designed to measure how coherent is the rhythm. How in sync are we, right? Because when we get the activity in our brain and nervous system in sync, that's really the highest state of optimal function, where we can clear the mental fog, where we can self-regulate better, make better choices, feel better, right? Because it's the rhythms of the heart, how I mentioned it goes to the brain, right? More to the brain. Well, those go directly to the emotional centers in the brain that are informing the brain, right, of how the body feels.
Interesting. Because
we don't say "I love you" with all my brain, do we? When we fall in love with someone, right? Well, there's a reason for that.
So my HRV is usually like around 36 to 38. So I'm 38 years old for reference, and I always get nervous that it's too low, because I have a lot of stuff going on. I'm a workaholic, and I always try to find ways of raising my HRV. Is that possible? So if we have like a lower HRV, can we raise it?
Boy, this gets into a longer discussion, but
the short version.
Sort of. So if you really want to measure how much, the how much question, which is what you're asking, that really should be done over 24 hours with an ambulatory recorder. That's the gold standard. So these little 1 minute, 5 minute snapshots, kind of meaningless from my perspective. And it gets kind of complicated. It's simple but complicated. What's really more important is energy management and practicing coherence. So what I would say that we certainly see examples of, if you have lower HRV than you should, that can often be recovered back to normal, right? Through self-regulation practices, emotional management, or making, lifestyle choices. But those are kind of small in comparison to really managing our emotions. Because it's the emotions that run the show in our physiology.
Yes.
Not thoughts. And that's so easy to prove here in the lab. And if we're constantly worried anxious, but adding drama and significance to all the little things. That's utilizing energy. That's using more, basically energy that drains us. And if we do that long enough, weeks, months, years, that's what depletes HRV, or a clinical disease like diabetes or something like that would be another reason that HRV drops. But for most people that have low HRV, it's because of mismanaged emotions.
The importance of trying to de-stress is so out there. I mean, we could literally go on about this. We need to have a part 2. Okay. So for those that are intrigued and want to learn more about your research and the important work that you're doing, where can people find you, and I'm going to link everything, but where could people go to learn more about these types of important topics?
Yeah. HeartMath.org. HeartMath.org.
Okay. So we're going to link that. I have a closing tradition on the podcast, and I like to ask a question from a card of decks that I have, or deck of cards that I have. I don't always know what comes out. I just kind of let it happen naturally. And let's see what the cards say. And I know.
What do the cards have in store for me?
What do they have in store? Okay. All right. So, okay. This is a good one. What if you were a magician and you can solve any problem in the world? What problem would you solve?
Separation. Well, the separation between people and their own larger self, their own higher self, and that inner guidance system, and with each other, is by far the biggest issue we have on planet Earth. It's the primary problem. It's not climate change. It's not, all the things we think it is, because those problems could easily be solved if we could get past the things that separate us from our own larger intelligence and each other.
Well, Dr. McCraty, thank you so much for all the research that you're doing, all of your work that you've been putting into. This is such an important field that I think is just going to get bigger and more expansive. So I am just so grateful and humbled that you came on the show and shared your wisdom and your knowledge with my audience. And I look forward to seeing all the work that you do in the future. And I just want to thank you again for coming on.
All right. Well, take care. And I enjoyed meeting you and hanging out for an hour or so with you.
Yes, likewise.